Hello everyone, thank you so much for tuning into another video of Nico's Aquatics here on the brand new Nico's Aquatic YouTube channel. My name is Nico. You can check us out online at nicosaquatics.com. The new site is up with some articles and whatnot is still being added to. So go ahead and check that out, bookmark it. Also follow us on Instagram at Nico's Aquatics for cool videos in between the videos, nice updates, pictures, all that sort of stuff we can communicate on there as well. Today I'm really excited because we're going to be talking about something that I love, absolute love, and that is the African cichlid, the best species of freshwater fish, period. There's nothing better than the African cichlid. Now there is one thing that a lot of people think with African cichlids, and that is, well, there's two things actually, and I'm gonna debunk both of them. That one, you cannot keep other breeds with African cichlids because they're too aggressive. That's our topic for today. Tank mates that are not cichlids, and two, which we'll get to in another video, that you can't keep live plants with African cichlids. That will be my next series of African cichlid videos that's coming out probably later on this week. So be sure you subscribe for that and stay tuned for that. So let's go ahead and get started here, guys, with this awesome video. I'm going to be debunking a lot of stuff, and I'm going to be giving you what I have personally used before, tank mates that I've had in my African cichlid tanks for years. I'll put clips in here to show how they interact with the cichlids and how nice, just an overall feel it gives to the tank to have something other than cichlids in the tank with them. So let's get started. Alright, so before we get into what the best tank mates are, I want to go over a few guidelines and things to point out just to make sure that you guys have a full understanding before you set up your African cichlid tank and include these other tank mates with them. There are some things you have to follow. So number one, just like any tank in any species, when you set up a fish tank, you want to kind of layer it, is what we call it. So you want to have because each fish does not go in different areas of the tank, right? So like a tetra, which is this guy right here, he normally stays near the top to the middle of the tank. And then also something like catfish. I have a couple of catfish in here. They stay near the bottom of the tank. And African cichlids are actually middle to bottom. They very rarely go up to the top of the tank. Unless, of course, they're feeding, of course, but they rarely go up to the top of the tank. They are very territorial, so they stay near the bottom of the tank. That's why they always recommend doing sand substrate, because they love digging and messing around in the sand and playing in the sand. It's really something quite awesome to see. So that's another little tip, substrate for sand substrate. So basically what you want to do is, because African cichlids are more of a middle to bottom layered fish, the tank mates you're going to want to get is going to be top to middle, more so top fish that stay near the top. So we'll get into a couple of more things here in a little while, but that's one thing you really want to focus on, not only with the African cichlids, but with any tank you set up. You want to make sure you layer it properly. You don't want to be too crowded in the middle, the middle of the tank, and have a bunch of dead space up at the top and nobody really near the bottom, so that kind of sucks. So always remember to layer your tank properly. The second thing to remember when keeping an African cichlid tank, and also with non-cichlid tank mates, is they're very territorial, just like I mentioned earlier. For me, I wouldn't consider them aggressive, but they're very territorial, which again, what that means is if when you put them in the tank, they basically establish their own area. So let's say you have an upside down broken pot, right? Just for example, one fish can basically make that their home. That is their spot. They're going to hold it down till death. So then when another one comes along and even just swims by it, the other one that has established that area, they feel threatened, and they basically fight. And what they do is they lip lock, they lock lips, and it actually is really dangerous, because when they lock a hold on, they do have little tiny teeth. If you look at it when they're yawning, you can actually see little tiny teeth on them. But when they lock on, sometimes there's been times, obviously, I've seen when, not with my fish, but on various videos and whatnot, where the you know, they can actually rip their lips off or rip their jaw off, and it gets really nasty. Now that's rarely does that happen, because they do normally break it up before then. But in my tanks, I have seen some pretty nasty fights there. A lot of times they'll have scar tissue. If you ever notice a cichlid with some white spots on their lips, that's exactly what that's from. That's from lip locking. That is their scar tissue that eventually does grow back and then gets back its color. But that's basically what that means when people say they're territorial. Now, the way to combat that, there's a few different ways to combat that. The best way, in my opinion, is to have... sorry, one of the dogs walking around here, as you can see. Toby, again, wants to be in the video. Okay, sorry, guys. So, basically, the way to combat that is, my personal opinion, the best way to do that is by creating what I call natural dividers. So, if you have a 55-gallon tank, which is what I had, that was over... I'll get to that in a minute, actually, overstocking. But if you have a 55-gallon tank, you want to have plenty of dividers in the tank. And what that means is, basically, you can use rocks, because Mbunas are... Mbunas, for those who don't know, is the actual type of breed. It's a Lake Malawi, that's where they come. They're called rockfish, that's what that means, Mbuna. So any African cichlid tank, you want to have a lot of rocks in there, because they love grazing off the rocks and using it as territories. So you can divide it up, have lots of different rocks, different levels of rocks. In a 55-gallon tank, I had about 3 or 4 cutoffs. And I'll throw up a picture for you guys here. And also, you can use floating plants, like this one here. I forgot what this one is called. Forgive me, guys. But in my African cichlid tank, I use hornwort, which is a amazing live plant for cichlids. Absolutely amazing. I highly recommend it. I had a ton of that stuff in the African cichlid tank, and it worked perfectly. And also for the tank mates as well, and I'll get to that in just a moment. But those natural dividers are a huge deal when it comes to African cichlids and keeping the aggression down. Second one is overstocking. Just like I mentioned, you want to overstock that tank. Now, for some of you who are not familiar with African cichlids or in the fish tank game, you think overstock, no, that's a big no-no. But with African cichlids, they are basically what happens is, if there's so many of them in the tank, they're not really able to focus their attention too much on one particular fish. So they kind of, just like with, just a prime example is mollies. They always say keep 3 females to 1 male, because the male just hounds the females to try to mate. So that's why, that's kind of the same sort of deal. You know, if there's a lot of them and it's spread out, it's not as bad, basically. That's the idea there. So that's a couple of ways to decrease the aggression and territorialness. And also the third, and maybe even more important than the dividers, I mean, all of these are just great tips, and I guarantee you, if you follow them, you will have a very successful and healthy, beautiful African cichlid tank. So the third one is to stock your tank all at once. I talked to somebody the other day on Instagram, and he was just set up an African cichlid tank, looked fantastic. He only had a couple of them in there, and he said, I'm slowly adding more. And I commented, and I wasn't trying to be rude or anything, but I said, you should really add all of them at once, because what happens is, if you add 5 in a tank, and then a couple weeks later you have 5 more, those are the newbies, and they're going to get picked on a lot, because those other 5 that have already been in there have already established their territories. You know, this is my yard, you're coming in my yard, you know, and then it causes a lot of stress. A lot of people, what I do for African cichlid tanks, you stock it all at once. But if you ever do add things later on, what you could do is just move around the tank a little bit, just to kind of refresh things, so everyone is basically new to the yard. Basically, that's kind of the way I think about it. And that is something that has worked for a lot for me and for a lot of other people as well. And last but not least, one more quick thing I want to add before we get into the actual list of recommendations for tank mates for the cichlids. African cichlids their water parameters are a little strange. So the pH, they like high pH and they like high temperature. So whatever you put in with, as far as tank mates go, they have to be able to withstand the high temperature and higher pH. Now, obviously, the ones that I'm about to recommend, they all go good with that. But if you want to add something else, I always recommend to check their maximum temperature and also their pH, whatever you're going to add in with the African cichlids, or else they're just not going to thrive, and most likely they're gonna die. So let's get into the list. Let's go. What everyone's been waiting for. Let's jump into it. So my all-time favorite tank mate, I'm going to give you the best first, then we'll go down the rest of them. So what I had in my African cichlid tank for years, and I'll, again, throw some pictures up for you, is Tiger Barbs. Tiger Barbs are a fantastic tank mate for African cichlids. I had them in there with actually a Livingstone. And that is actually a hunting fish. If you've never seen these type of fish in the wild or in different atmospheres, they'll literally play dead on their side until a smaller fish comes up, and then he'll snatch to eat them. That's how aggressive. And it was a big fish. It was probably got to be about that big. And I had him in there with them for years. Started out pretty small, and probably about that big, and then they started growing. Tiger Barbs are about 3 inches, maybe. They're not very big at all. But the good thing about Tiger Barbs is the water parameters are very close. And more importantly, no, not more importantly, but most importantly, is they are top swimmers. They stay up at the top of the tank. So the cichlids are down here. They're up at the top. And what's super important is they stay in schools. That is a huge deal when it comes to cutting down on the aggressiveness and being bullied. So I can't tell you how many times when I used to do videos on my old channel doing African cichlid videos, I would have probably at least 1 to 2 comments on all my African cichlid videos saying, "Why are you keeping Tiger Barbs in there?" People being shocked I'm keeping Tiger Barbs, and they said, "Oh, they'll be a nice snack for the cichlids." And I just laughed because I'm like, dude, you don't know anything about it. Do you really think I would put them in there if I thought they were going to be killed? I mean, come on. I had them in there for years, no problems. I did not lose a fish. I did not see any of them get bullied, nothing. And I had a count on them. Every couple of days, I would count them. I had anywhere from 15 to 25 in that 55-gallon tank. Again, overstocking is key. I had 2 filters going on both sides that was doing about double the tank size. Double the amount of gallons of the actual tank. So, and I did frequent water changes. Now with cichlids, obviously water changes are super important because it's overstocked. They love eating. They're active. So, that's another thing with African cichlids. But believe me, it's worth it. So Tiger Barbs are by far my #1 tank mate for African cichlids, because it adds. Because with an African cichlid, man, before I got him, the tank was so gorgeous, but there was just an empty spot up at the top, and I couldn't stand that. I wanted something up at the top, so I went to my LFS, talked to my guy, and he pointed out Tiger Barbs, so I got like 10 of them at that time, and then basically I added more throughout some time. With the Tiger Barbs, it's a little different. You don't have to add them all at once. Because, again, those are all up at the top, and also they're schooling fish. So as long as you do about 8 to 10 at a time, you're good to go, because they look a lot bigger, obviously, when they're coming in schools. That's the whole point of it. So that was really cool. And, again, they were in there with bumblebee cichlids, the Livingstone. I had OBs. I mean, I had some pretty aggressive, in a Kenya, too. I had blue Kenya, those are really aggressive as well. Snow White. I mean, I had some pretty aggressive fish there, and I never, ever had any problems with it. So that's #1 on the list, and I highly recommend getting that. If you're looking for tank mates for a cichlid tank, get them. All right, so #2 tank mate for African cichlids is a crayfish. Now, there's a few things I want to mention with crayfish, keeping them with African cichlids. There's a few guidelines you have to follow in order for this to work. It's a bit of a more difficult one. Like Tiger Barbs, you throw them in there in the school and you're gravy. But with the crayfish, I had a vanilla crayfish, absolutely gorgeous. I'll put some pictures up. It just added just new life to the tank, and it was so awesome to watch because they have a lot of personality as well. So basically what you want to do with the crayfish, and this goes for all of them, not just vanillas, you want to make sure that they're the bigger ones, like at least probably 4 to 5 inches all together, with including the calls extended and everything. Because if they're smaller ones, they will get eaten when they molt. So for those of you who don't know, molting is when they basically shed their ectoskeleton, their shell, to grow into a new one. So basically what happens is, for, I believe it's a few days after they molt, I think it's every 6 months, don't quote me on that, they molt to grow, and then for a couple of days, I believe it is, you're going to have to do your own research on that, but they're soft, so they can very easily be eaten by, larger fish with larger mouths. Like that Livingstone would definitely eat the crayfish if my tank wasn't set up properly. You need a lot of hiding spots, a lot of, just like I mentioned earlier, natural dividers in the tank, and you will not have a problem with it. I know it sounds like it's kind of one of those deals where it's like, it should work out. You're probably going to have issues, so why not, just don't take the risk. But I had my crayfish in there for several years, and I had no problems with them picking on it. Because, again, the crayfish can hold its own if it's not soft, right? So when it's soft, it's hard to defend itself because, they can really munch on them. But when, again, I believe that only lasts a day or two, but do your own research on that. I could be wrong. Probably I am on that. They have pinchers, man. They got those claws, and nobody's really going to mess with them on that. And they're also great bottom feeders. Cichlids don't normally eat off the bottom, although they are bottom swimmers, middle to bottom, just like I mentioned. They normally don't eat off the bottom, especially flakes or any sort of food that's been in there for a couple of minutes. So that's perfect for the crayfish. So my recommendation is a vanilla crayfish, especially if you have sand. It just looks absolutely amazing in the tank with sand. So that's number 2. Let's go on to a couple of other kind of honorable mentions. So let's go ahead and get on to those. All right, so now as far as tank mates go for algae eaters, there's really not a whole lot of options, to be honest with you. Now, you cannot put autos in there, obviously, because autos are very, very docile and they don't get very large, so they will get picked on and most likely killed. So basically, the only thing I would recommend for algae eaters is a snail of some sort. The cichlids will not pick on snails at all. Also, nearite snails are really good. That's what I had in my tank. Now, the only problem with nearite snails is they will leave eggs all over your glass and all over your driftwood and whatnot. And it's kind of a pain to get those off. They will not hatch. They have to be hatched in brackish water. So you can just leave them there, or you can scrape them off. And it is a little bit annoying, I'll be honest with that. But they're fantastic algae eaters. I had a lot of those in there in that tank. If you have a larger tank, it won't look as bad. If you have like a 20-gallon tank like this, you can really notice the eggs. So that's up to you guys if you want that. Now, also, as far as a fish goes for algae eaters, obviously Plecostomus is where to go, is where it is for that. I'm just not a huge fan of plecos because they, not only do they just like never stop growing, but they just have so much waste. Like they poop non-freaking stop, man. So that's a real pain. But they are really awesome fish. They're great algae eaters. Excuse me. And there's so many varieties, man. I had a rhino one in mind. That's really awesome looking. It's just, the only thing is, because they produce so much waste, you're already overstocking the tank to cut back on aggressiveness and territorialness. So it's going to be even more of a headache for you with that. So I would just recommend snails, man, honestly. I have seen people put gold algae eaters or the Chinese algae eaters in there. Those are pretty aggressive. Like, you can't put those in there with shrimp or any of the smaller ones, because what they do is they actually will try to suck the slime and attack other fish while they're still swimming around. It's kind of annoying. But obviously, they probably wouldn't try that with the cichlids. Now, the reason why I'm mentioning that is because I've never had them. I have seen a lot of people do it. It's one of the recommendations when I was doing research for this. So just full warning, you know, what do they say? Full disclaimer, I've never actually had those in there. So, you know, if you do get them, I would recommend try to get them as big as possible. Supposedly they get 11 inches in the wild, but in captivity they only get to be about 5 inches. So, which is about the normal size of a cichlid, 5 to 7 inches. So you could get away with it. So that's a recommendation there. Excuse me, my throat's so dry tonight. Corona? No, I'm just kidding. But just going down my list here. I don't want to forget anything. Oh yeah, bottom feeders. Sorry. So just a couple more things here. We'll wrap up the video. I know this is going long, but I just want to get all this information out, because I know there's a lot of misinformation about cichlids. Like you can't keep, you know, plants, which we'll get into in another video. You can't keep any other breeds. So, you know, whatever. I like debunking this stuff. So basically, I used to have rainbow sharks or red-tailed sharks, whatever you want to call them, in with my cichlids. They're pretty good. I would definitely keep 2 or more at least, just because they're also a little territorial with each other. And they also will kind of gang up, not gang up, but they will kind of go after the smaller cichlids. So whenever you get a rainbow shark or red-tailed shark, whatever, you want to make sure it's pretty significantly smaller than the cichlids you have in there, because the rainbow sharks are actually pretty aggressive, believe it or not, even towards cichlids. But they're great bottom feeders. You know, they're really good cleaners as far as getting the uneaten food. So like I said, I had a couple of those in there for a couple of years as well, and I had no problems. Obviously, the crayfish for the bottom feeder, and also a clown loach. Clown loaches are really awesome. I've never had them, but I know they are extremely popular in the cichlid community. They're great fish, and also the water parameters are very close to the African cichlid ones as well. So they do great in there as well. They're they just kind of keep to themselves, and they're really good loaches to keep for bottom feeders. So just a couple more things. Excuse me. Bayless sharks. I never had these two. The next ones here are just honorable mentions. I've never had them. But Bayless sharks work good from my research and asking around. Bayless sharks are gorgeous. Like, they almost look like tin foil sharks. Very, very beautiful, silver with blue. Now, when you do add those in there, you want to make sure that you add them at the same time, or at least rearrange the tank to prevent aggression and territorialness. Also, you want to make sure that the Bayless shark is bigger than the cichlids, because they're a little bit less aggressive. They can fight back, but you just kind of want to cut back on the chances of them getting into something. Just make sure they're a little bit bigger than the cichlids you have, just so the cichlids will get a little bit more intimidated from them, so they won't try it. Also, last but not least, tinfoil barbs. Tinfoil barbs, I've never had them. They get freaking huge, so you need a pretty big tank for those. But again, those are also schooling fish. It's another barb. Those are gorgeous as well. It looks like they're wrapped in tinfoil, hence the name. Very beautiful silvers. They have some reds in them too. So I would definitely recommend those as well. Just keep them probably 3 to 4 or more at a time, because they are, again, schooling fish, and they're near the top as well. So those work perfectly with the cichlids. But that's it, guys. Thank you so much. These are my notes here I took down for this video. I didn't want to forget anything. So I appreciate it, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. God bless. Stay safe out there. More to come. If you guys have any questions, drop it in the comments. Bye-bye, guys. Stay wet. God bless.